Greetings, friends, and welcome to our book club for September 2023. I'm super excited about this month's book club, which features not only a little bit of a review, guided tour, if you will, of the book Icelandic Plant Magic, Folk Herbalism of the North, but also a wee interview, a little chat with the author of this book, the incredibly sweet Albert Björn. So let's start with the interview, and I'll be back with you after that for the review. So tell me how all this started for you. You're at a point now where you wrote a whole book, and I know you're spending a lot of time, hanging out with the land. And so, what's the starting point? Where did it begin?
For like my practice in general, or just for how the book came about?
Both. Let's do both.
Okay. So I started really from watching Charmed when I was maybe like 12. That was the gateway drug to Wicca, which then Wicca turned out to be the gateway drug to more tradcraft sort of animistic focused stuff. And then I moved to Iceland like 7 years ago, but before that I was getting more into like runes and things. Which ironically now, I don't use like the Elder Furbolg runes that much anymore. It's more just staves and stuff. And I was lucky to have a teacher, like a rune teacher in the UK, who taught me a bunch of stuff, and then carry that over to here, and then learn from other people here. And yeah, it's like sitting in the nature for hours and hours as well. Like that's been the main sort of, other than books and people, that's like those three things are the three things that are like, that's where I've learned this from. But for the book, it was like my COVID project, really. I'd had an idea about making a book like this for quite a long time. And specifically because I could find loads of stuff on Icelandic plant life, like the folklore on those specific plants. But it was in Icelandic, and there wasn't a lot of stuff about it that was translated into English so much. So I was just like, I'm going to have to do this myself. And I went through loads of source material and was translating loads of stuff, and then working with people in my group as well, who I was finding stuff and showing them, and they were like, oh my God, I never knew that. Like that's a thing in a book that I have in my house that's in Icelandic that I've had for 20 years, and I've never read that one bit. That's really cool. So that was nice to sort of make it be something that's more than just educating people on Icelandic stuff outside of Iceland. It was nice to have. I've actually, since it's been published as well, I've had quite a lot of people ask me about where exactly does stuff grow around the city and things as well, which is super nice, because then I've been able to get really because I'm quite in our very small community. I'm quite involved in that here, but there are so many people who don't maybe know the 3 or 4 people who would be their gateway into this group. So that's been super nice to connect with a bunch of random people that I would never have, even though it's such a small island, I would never have crossed paths with them. So that's been really cool. But yeah, it was my COVID project, and I just sort of gathered everything together that I've been working on for a while, and did a bit of a cross-reference of okay, I've had these personal experiences with Rowan and Juniper and things like that. And then there's this specific lore, and then there's these myths about it from the Icelandic sagas and stuff, and sort of cross-reference all these things, and then as well with experiences of friends, and they've confirmed these things as well. So I've sort of tried to make it be a collective of, because it's not just my stuff. It's this is, most of it is stuff that I'm there is some link at least to people doing this in the past, whether it's in some written story, or whether it's a family, a grandma's grandma used this for something, or that sort of thing. So that's cool. I think that's been the main sort of thing for me. And then I feel like I know I've put the work into it, but because it's not solely information that's mine, I'm still, when people are like, oh, you've written this book, I'm like, yeah, I've gathered all this stuff and I've done these bits, but it still hasn't really sort of hit me that it's I've put this thing out. I don't know. It's interesting. But that's the sort of the long, short answer of that.
That's awesome. Yeah, and it's a feat, putting a book together. Even folks I know that have done books that are just entirely based on representing folklore, you know, in a more contemporary context. Like it's still your blood, sweat, and tears on the
Yeah.
pages, like for sure. Uh, Two things I want to circle back on. One is that you sort of mentioned the convergence of like what I call the Green Gnosis, right? Like personal experiences. You mentioned like personal experiences with Juniper and Rowan, and then having that edified by what's in the lore, and then
Yeah.
having that edified by what other people who are doing the work say. Man, that to me, when that happens, is just like that's like where the so magical. It's so good.
Yeah.
Um, yeah. The other point I really appreciate, and it's kind of when I already knew the book was going to go in a direction I was really going to like because I had kind of flipped through it. Eh, but I knew it was going to get good when you very early on, like probably within the first few pages, maybe it's pretty early, you are accountable for that fact that when people think of sorcery or magic or even like just journey work through an Icelandic lens, it's always runes,
Yeah.
full stop. Or like maybe if you're with people that know a little bit, Galder will come up, right? And you sort of start there. You're like, look, this is kind of all people think this is, and it's
Mm.
not all this is, you know. So I appreciate that you've sort of blown the roof off of it and been like, look, there's also plant lore and charm lore and syncretism and like all of this beautiful stuff that I think gets so glossed over, as do so many, cultural traditions of this work. So when you dropped that, I was like, oh, this is gonna get good. And it did. Well delivered. Um, on a personal level, this is just something I like to ask everybody because mostly because I'm curious, voyeuristic this way. Do you have a personal experience with, because it's a very plant heavy book, even though there's so much stave work in here and charms that are maybe not plant centric, but you've found creative ways to bring the plant spirits in. It's a pretty heavily plant magic book. Do you have you had an experience with a single plant or something along the way that was kind of the moment when you were like, oh, this is very immediate and very real, you know?
I think of all of the, I mean, so there's two, like there's Juniper it grows everywhere here, and there are so many. It's a bit of, I came at it a little bit from within like my personal practice from the angle of people are using Palo Santo and stuff, and like endangered woods and things like that. So then I'm like, I don't want to be like contributing to that. What can I work with? And then I was like, oh well, Juniper does pretty much almost similar, like almost the same stuff, at least with cleansing and clearing space, but also like inviting stuff in. Um, and so then I started using that. I wasn't using much Palo Santo before, but I was like, I'm going to make this a point to burn Juniper um, before I do any sort of work, and also before like greeting the land and stuff, and just see how that flows. And it just really sort of like opened doors, and just I was just like, oh wow, okay, this is like I'm breathing in the smoke, and it's all around, and ooh, and it feels you can feel it in the air, and it's nice, and then it's like, oh okay, this is like I don't know, it felt like my eyes had sort of like opened a bit more with that, which was super nice. But then the other one as well, like because I was raised Catholic, and then very quickly moved away from that. Um, I had like not a great relationship like with the church and stuff, and so for Icelandic magic to be like this huge, like a huge amount of it is Christian magic, or at least is coming from Christian mysticism. Um, and that for a minute that was a bit hard to grasp. But then I was working with Lady's Mantle, and in Icelandic it's called Mariustakar. It's like Mary's veil, and that was like a big thing of like there was this connection with the Virgin Mary, and I'm like, but I'm a witch. Like this doesn't feel like it should work or feel right. And then the more I sort of dug into that lore, it's like there's all this stuff in Iceland about Mary and Freya being like very heavily syncretized, and like the Queen of the Elves is like this mantle that both Freya and Mary have in Iceland. And so then it was like, oh, actually, yeah, this is really, there's a lot more to this, and maybe I was being a bit closed-minded to do the like, oh, this is some Christian stuff, so it's not for me thing. And yeah, that really helped, like just drinking tea, and just being around it, like in the nature. It's like I got a lot of the time that the spirit of this plant felt very much like this veiled woman standing sort of solemnly, but like with a very calming aura. And it was, yeah, then it just really sort of clicked, and I was like, oh, this feels nice. And so then I was praying the Hail Mary in Icelandic, which in Icelandic has a bit of a different feel, which was cool. And yeah, it just sort of clicked, and it's worked for loads of healing stuff, and protective things as well. And interestingly, like I'm going to dig a bit deeper into this, but there's a side of Mary which in Icelandic folk magic, which probably comes more from Freya, of this sort of revenge aspect, and working with, like, Maria Freya is what we would say, working with this spirit for like full revenge and for sort of getting your own back on things, which I'm like, that's not the Virgin Mary of Catholicism that I was raised to know about. So that was super interesting. But there's been a bit of an edge with that, with working with this plant, that I felt that of like, oh, this is maybe a road I should have a look. Maybe not, I don't need, there's no one I need to take revenge on at the moment in my life, like, so that's good. But just exploring maybe that sort of how that work would look, because it's so different from this very sort of rigid, the rigid likeness of Christianity saying like, oh, witchcraft is evil and don't do this, and the Virgin Mary is pure and good and incapable of doing any harm. And I'm like, oh, okay, because within Icelandic stuff it's very different. So yeah, I think those two are the sort of the two biggest ones that have hit me. Hopefully not the only ones, because I'm going to be out now. I mean, like, the growing season here is very small, and almost everything now is done. But I'll still be out in the nature, and if I find little patches of things that haven't quite started to die yet, then I'm gonna keep exploring and see what comes up.
That's fantastic. Yeah, I mean, I think one of the cool things of this book specifically, but also just the ways in general, is, animism is fundamentally syncretic, right? That when we find things that work, or that make sense in a non-appropriative, non-like thefty way, there's a way of like working together, right? Like learning from one person, and we see these like Christian deities mixing with the pagan deities in these really cool ways. Marian, what would I call it, like, for lack of a better term in the moment, like Marian herbology, Marian
Yeah.
herbalism has always fascinated me, because yeah, I mean, there's not a plant from any of the, I'm definitely more familiar with the sort of English folklore, but there's not a plant that in one way or another has not been given some kind of name making it relevant to the pastimes of Mary.
Yeah,
Right? Like they like all, if you dig deep enough, all of them in one way or another are, her socks, her earrings, her hair braid. Like there's something to her. And even looking at the way she was introduced into the church by Saint Bernard, I think, recognizing that there was no presence of the feminine of the land, right? And so then they open the doors for this figure to be relevant in the church, and suddenly she's like a nature goddess, and people who are on like surface level Catholicism don't see it, and you're like, wait, like, look at, she's literally like enrobed in the stars and like standing on the moon. Come on. So very cool. I'm glad that stuff worked that's in. I won't keep you much longer, but I'm wondering too, and you kind of already touched on this, but because this book just came out, and I think there's a lot of fresh content in it,
Hmm.
there's a lot of books written all the time, as you well know, I'm sure, on aspects of this work, right? And a lot of them are just repetitive, right? So this particular book, the one you wrote, very fresh, lots of stuff I've never heard, lots of perspectives that I have not stepped into. So I always appreciate getting that. Um, so I'm curious, how has it been for you sort of sharing all of this, putting it all out there, kind of, um, maybe grabbing maybe for some people it feels like being grabbed by the shoulders and like jostled a little bit, like, hey, there's more. And then maybe for folks like me, it's just very affirming. So how has it been for you to be kind of holding this and like, yeah, being the torchbearer, I guess?
It's so like I love it. I'm so happy with how it's gone. Part of me is like I've had to learn like the language and the landscape and the cultural context and all of this stuff. Like I've had to learn it since I've moved here. And so part of me is like, how has no one printed this sort of thing in English before? Um, Part of like some of the stuff, because there's some stuff that like I check in with my group of like, is this okay to share outside of Iceland and that sort of thing? Because there is some stuff that like we're not really allowed to share because of our like traditions and stuff. But it's still like it's like I don't know. I feel very grateful and I feel very lucky that I've been able to do all of this. Sometimes I'm like, am I good enough? Because I'm just an immigrant who's come here and doesn't like. I mean, my Icelandic it's good enough to do this. It's not fluent. I don't know anyone who hasn't lived here for like less than 10 years, who can speak perfect Icelandic. But it's been like a whole process of sort of adopting this country and then really working what I was doing in the way that I was engaging with the land in Sussex in this animistic way, like engaging with it here at the start in the same sort of way, getting a bit of a vibe and like flowing through all of these things and seeing what works here and what doesn't work here, and then sort of rebuilding all of it. So like to finally have this be a thing that I've done, and to have like all of, because it's like years and years of practice that's gone into this from all these different aspects. It's like it's very cool, and I feel very grateful and very happy to have done it. Um, Part of me is still just, I don't know, a bit like, why has no one else done this? Because it's like it's here, like there's so much here. And looking through all these books of folklore, even I'm like, people were recording stories here that were just like random hearsay from the 12th century that's like survived through books all the way down, or like there's so much stuff that's so old that I've never seen before, never heard before, and then I'm translating this stuff and I'm like, oh my fucking God, this is like, why are people like, because there's so much that people still sort of do within their lives here with plants and with this animistic like way of looking at the land and respecting the nature and not stepping on the moss and not moving the rocks because the elves live there and that sort of thing. And that's talked about a lot more, but there's so much more underneath. um so for my next book, um, I'm going to be including a lot more of that. Um, but yeah, it's been nice and sort of affirming of like, I've been checking in with my group and checking in with elders in this tradition of like, can I say this? And that's been the thing really for me. That's like they've been saying like, yeah, you can share this, and we trust you to share this. And so that for me is like, that's the biggest thing that I've got out of this experience. That I'm like, I feel very honored to be able to do this. Another long answer, sorry, but yeah, I just feel very grateful of how it's all happened, and hopefully how it's going to continue to happen, because I hope that people enjoy this for a long time. Um,
Yeah, instant classic, I think. And you get the bug. Like you write, I remember after I finished my first one, I was like, oh God, that was like so intense. And I'm gonna take, maybe I'm good. And then the next one came. Like, so I
yeah,
think once you break the
like
seal, it's
tattoos.
like now you're just writing books. So I have somehow procrastinated my next one for a really long time. So this winter might be another book writing winter. We'll see. But um yeah. That's awesome. I think that's all I got. Other than should mention, because I forgot to mention earlier, that we have a shared fondness for juniper. Um, I wear juniper wood around my neck all the time.
Nice.
We have a juniper osteosperma here where I live, which is like a high desert, very pokey
Okay.
juniper. Um, and so much though. I mean, literally the mountains behind me are green right now. They won't be for very long. Soon they'll be covered in snow. But I mean, that greenness I was telling somebody the other day is like cedar, juniper, sagebrush, some like a couple other plants mixed in, a little bit of pine. Um, but very much the same thing that I felt this really weird attraction to this tree, and I've never been like a tree guy. I've always been like floral and soft herbs because my history is starts in clinical herbalism. Like I come into it backwards. Um, and so I'm always like, oh, this particular plant and whatever. And so juniper, you know, yelled at me enough times that I sat with that plant and got to the exact same place you did, where it was like, everything that happens, and this was something that I got from working with juniper, and it's part of my daily juniper work, that everything that happens under the canopy of that tree becomes auspicious, right? So that's just the way they talk to me about cleansing and purifying and also calling in the good. And so I'm the same way. I burn juniper like crazy. And to me, to have these bioregional, culturally relevant, and sensitive, being aware of where I am, especially the way that white sage and Palo Santo is another big one here in the Americas, have just been over harvested and misrepresented. And um, it's just very cool that we always have plants that can show up for us and do what needs to be done in a way that isn't stepping on somebody else, and isn't over harvesting the hell out of these herbs. And so I appreciate too your dedication of making checking with on stuff, and it's very cool. It's all very cool.
I feel like more people should have that attitude, because I've had quite a lot of people get quite angry about it, and I'm like, like it's sort of, I don't know. It's not pure. I mean, I guess depending on who you are and where you're from, maybe it's not completely objective. But I'm a bit like, this is, if it's an issue for someone and you could do something about it, then maybe do something about it. But you know,
Yeah, even if that someone is the plants, right? Like even if you, for whatever reason, can talk yourself out of respecting the closed indigenous practices of people where you live, like even if you can talk yourself out of that, um, and which people have done to me too, especially around Palo Santo. It's like, well, can you at least respect the plant? The fact that that plant is struggling right now, is in many places being over harvested to the point of being threatened. Like if you can't, then I don't know if you're really doing this work. Like I don't know if you're really doing plant work if the plants aren't respected and listened to in what you're doing, right? Cool. Thank you so much for talking about your book, for writing the book, for being available, and all the great stuff you share on the social medias. I'll share your YouTube and your Patreon and your social media stuff down in the video details for all the folks who will want to connect with you. Yeah, so thanks for hanging out and talking. It was really nice to meet you finally.
yeah, same. Thank you.
But
This is so. It's just so lovely. Like I'm really grateful that this has happened. I'm really, really thankful that you've liked my book enough to talk about it. Like,
oh yeah,
thank you.
prepare for more as people start reading it and the word gets around. You'll get hit up a lot for all the things, podcasts and videos, and whatever ones feel right, go do them. It's fun to just get out and talk to people, and come to the States sometime. We can hang out. We'll go talk about plants with you. There's some great festivals here. I've been bad at going to them. I'm not always like the most social person. But yeah, if you ever wanted to come to the States, there's always plenty of stuff to do.
I'm thinking next year to try and come for like a long period of time so I can see people in as many places as I can.
Yeah, it'd be awesome.
Yeah, that'd be amazing.
Cool. Well, thank you so much. And like I said, I'll share your stuff below and we'll talk again soon, all right?
Yeah, thanks.
See you. A big thanks again to Albert for taking time to chat with me. It was a ton of fun talking to him and sharing about plants. So I'm going to make the review a little bit on the short side only because we were able to cover some of what's in this book in the interview itself. But there are a couple of key bits in this particular text that I don't want to leave unspotlit, right? The first is that Albert begins the book with a short treatise on animism, right? So whenever I see that, I'm probably going to be into it. It's probably going to be important to me. And I really like the way that he grounds the folklore and everything that comes after that first section in this concept of being in relationship to place and in relationship to tradition and relationship to culture and relationship to land spirits and deities and plants. And it really sets a beautiful tone for the rest of the book, which covers a ton of ground considering that it's not massive. And honestly, the second time that I read this, I had to go back and check the page count because I was like, it feels like a book 3 times that size, but it was so digestible. So, spoiler alert, go buy the book. But I still want to give you a little bit of a tour. First, one really interesting thing is, and we kind of talked about this in the interview too, that there's an angle of Icelandic practice that really gets pigeonholed into runes for divination and runic magic, stave magic, and Galder, of course. This book builds on that in a way that I think might be unexpected for people who are interested in those particular practices, even though it's presented as a plant magic book. I really would consider this a mystery, kind of a mystery 2.0 of some of those basic practices that are the ones that tend to bring people in. It's not overt, but the spirit is there. So if you're able to look at the practices, the staves, the charms, the stories, the folklores, you will start gleaning something about the spirit of these practices and where they came from and what they look like when they're really fleshed out. So that is awesome. The herbarium and fungarium, I should mention, there are a few mushrooms in this book, which is so awesome. The herbarium covers scientific names, of course, so that we know which plant we're talking about. I really appreciate that he did that. Folk names, usually several folk names, both in English and in Icelandic. Tons of story, folklore, little tidbits on some of them, bigger narratives on other ones, I think depending on what's out there. Medicinal applications, magical applications, and one of the very generous gifts in the herbarium, which is kind of reads like an A to Z, right? So the herbs are kind of listed A to Z, generally by more commonly known, still folk names, field horsetail and eyebright and dandelion and couchgrass, is that Albert has tucked in to a lot of these plants little aspects of working with them. For example, he might say, and something you want to know about this plant is you can work with them in this way to accomplish this goal. And so before you even get to the kind of more grimoire section of the book, the working section, the charms and such, you're already getting inspired on what it looks like to bring these plants into a really practical application of green sorcery. So 10 out of 10 there for sure. One of the chapters that was unexpected for me and that I really enjoyed was the chapter, I think it's literally called Plants of the Gods, right? And so he breaks down many deities from the Icelandic pagan pantheon and talks about plants that may be connected to those deities in folklore, or might resonate with the personality of that deity, or plants that you could consider working with in ritual or as offerings to bring you closer into kind of a harmonious relationship with that deity. So cool. And I flipped right to Ingfreyr, and was so happy to see Selgresi listed, ribwort or plantain, Plantago major, Plantago lanceolata. So cool the way that he wove sort of the energy of ribwort into the person of Freyr, right? So cool. One of my favorite sections of the book. There's a bunch on tools, crafting, consecrating, working with. A lot of the tools covered in that section get brought up in later working aspects, so it's a really good read. There's a section on crafting medicine, crafting magic, with a focus on tea and oil, incense, recipes that are super practical, right? I don't feel like he wrote one line in this book that none of us could find some resonance with. I found myself, I'm a book writer, by the way. I write in my books, I highlight my books, I tuck notes in. Some people hate that. It's who I am as a person, and I'm never going to change that. I was really kind of going nuts in that section because everything in his sharing about oils and sharing about building incenses and sharing about how just sitting and drinking tea can be a fantastic segue into a plant spirit connection stirred up so much inspiration for me. So, and I've been doing this a long time, longer than I want to admit. And so when books come out now in 2023, I mentioned this in our interview, that give me something new to think about, that challenge something I've been doing to make me really think about why I'm doing it that way, I'm sold, because it's so rare. Most of what comes out is just rehashed, same material, right? It's everybody writing Scott Cunningham and Paul Byrill books over and over again, right? This is not that. This is something truly unique. There's a recipe in this book that I cannot wait to try. I'm going to be harvesting some Juniper osteosperma, some high desert juniper from one of my favorite stands here in a couple weeks at the full moon. And there's a really cool recipe in here for a juniper vinegar that Albert sort of offers as an alternative to a true like juniper seining or a juniper fumigation, where you would, get a cast iron or a wood bowl or a stone bowl, and you would smolder so much juniper in the house that all the windows would need to be open because the smoke would be so thick, right? That's a traditional way to do a suffumigation with these purifying herbs. But he says, some of us live in apartments, some of us live in houses, some of us have respiratory stuff or animals or whatever, and we don't want to do that. So he has built this really beautiful juniper vinegar that can be used to cleanse, to add to cleansing baths, to floor washes, spray bottles, whatever. I thought that was very innovative and very cool. So I'm definitely going to make some of that. And I'll wrap up with, just a nod towards the Galdrabook. The Spellbook section of this is so solid and so sweet. I'm going to flip through. I'm going to try to show you a couple pages too, because there are rune staves shared for most of the charms and spells, and that's super cool, right? So for folks who are interested in rune stave, sigil work, whatever, you will find some very cool stuff in here. And so there's charms and spells in here for the physical malady, for against inflammation, against nightmares, for restful sleep, building a luck and money drawing, charms for various spirits. It's very, very dense and inspiring. And again, it's not a big book, but what I have found in books that are written like this by people like Albert is that after you've read a few of the charms, you sort of get initiated into the way of thinking, right? That led to those charms. You get initiated into the perspective, the animist perspective, the sorceress perspective. You get initiated into thinking in terms of magical ritual relationship with plant spirits. So instead of just knowing the what from one teacher, they also very subtly sort of gift you the how, right? The A to Z, the steps. They give you a framework on which you can hang your practice and continue evolving it after, 295 pages. Then 296 page belongs to you, and you just take that and you run with it. And that is the hallmark of a great teacher and a great book. So I cannot recommend this enough. It is out, I think, everywhere. The publisher sent me this early copy, which is how I've been fortunate enough to have so much time to read it a few times before talking about it. But it came from Crossed Crow Books, and it is out everywhere as far as I know at this point. So go snag a copy. Let me know what you think about this book after you've read it. Please let Albert know what you've experienced from the book. Please, when you pick up books like these from people like us, a review on Barnes & Noble or Amazon or whatever means more than you know, because it's that kind of thing that tells another person like, hey, this is not another basic book. There's something in here that's special that's going to help you get where you really want to get. So take the time to leave those reviews, to DM or tag the author. It goes a really long way in keeping folks fired up and keeping us excited about what we're doing. So with that, I will let you get on with your shopping so you can go pick up this book. And if you have not connected with Albert Björn, I will share his contact information in the videos below. Make sure and follow him on all the socials and everything. And with that, thank you so much. Blessings of peace and plenty. I will see you at our next book club. Take care.